A ship sailed into a harbor with a dead crew. No storm, no battle, no survivors at the wheel. And what walked off that ship didn't just kill people, it erased entire towns from the map. This is the story of the plague that made parents abandon their own children. And somehow, it's also a story about how humans refuse to die out. Here's what nobody tells you about the Black Death. It didn't just kill the sick. It killed trust. It killed religion for some. It killed law. But by the end of this video, you'll understand something most people never learn in school. This plague accidentally rebuilt the modern world. Higher wages, fewer kings with total power. The first cracks in a system that had trapped people for centuries. Stick around, because the ending of this story is stranger than the horror in the middle. History isn't lying to you. It's just leaving out the parts that would terrify you. This is Timeline Secrets. Picture a world with no idea what bacteria even was. No microscopes, no antibiotics, no 9/11. Just people watching their neighbors turn black and die in under a week with zero explanation. Trade ships moved goods across entire continents, which sounds great, until you realize disease travels the same routes as silk and spices. Something was riding along in the cargo, and nobody knew it yet. By the time anyone figured out what was happening, it was already too late to stop it. A merchant ship pulls into a busy port. Dock workers wait to unload the cargo like any other day. Except the ship doesn't answer signals. No one comes on deck. When officials finally board it, they find the crew dead or dying, skin turning dark, bodies swollen. The smell alone makes grown men run. Someone gives the order. Burn the ship. Send it back out to sea. Too late. Rats had already slipped onto the docks, and with them, fleas carrying something no one in that port would survive long enough to name. Within days, people in that city start collapsing in the street. Within weeks, the disease has a 100-mile head start on anyone trying to stop it. Forget the numbers for a second. Numbers don't make you feel anything. Picture a mother waking up with a fever. By afternoon, painful swellings the size of eggs appear under her arms. By nightfall, she can't stand. Her husband has two choices: stay and risk infecting their children, or leave her alone to die so the rest of the family might live. Thousands of families made that same impossible choice. Parents left children in doorways. Priests refused to give last rites because touching the dying meant becoming the dying. And the worst part? What came next was almost harder to survive than the disease itself. When death is everywhere, some people don't get scared. They get reckless. Gangs of looters raided empty homes before bodies were even cold. Some people partied through the streets, figuring they'd die either way. So, why not enjoy it? Others turned to blame. They needed someone to be responsible for the horror, even if it made no sense. That search for a scapegoat led to some of the darkest chapters of the whole outbreak. Chapters we'll get to, because you need to understand exactly how far fear can push ordinary people. But first, there's a quieter kind of horror happening in the countryside, one most people never hear about. Cities get the historical spotlight. Villages got erased. Some farming villages lost so many people that there was no one left to bury the dead, harvest the crops, or ring a church bell to mark the hour. Travelers would pass through weeks later and find empty houses, untouched meals still on the table, and no explanation, just silence where a community used to be. Entire villages disappeared from records completely, not conquered, not relocated, just gone. And here's the part that should unsettle you. Some of history's smartest people were completely convinced. They knew the cause. They were catastrophically wrong. Doctors at the time believed the sickness spread through bad air. So people carried flowers and herbs to block the smell of death, thinking the scent itself was the killer. Others blamed the position of the planets. Others turned that blame into violence against entire communities who had nothing to do with any of it. A horrifying and shameful chapter that spread almost as fast as the plague itself. None of the real cause, a bacteria carried by fleas on rats, was understood for centuries. People were fighting a war against an enemy they couldn't even see, using weapons that did absolutely nothing. Which makes what happens next even more remarkable. While most of the continent panicked, a few cities did something radical for their time. They started keeping ships offshore before letting anyone dock, forcing crews to wait and prove they weren't sick before entering port. That waiting period is where we get the word quarantine, and it may have been one of the first organized public health responses in human history. Some towns separated the sick from the healthy on purpose, long before anyone understood germs. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't science yet, but it was the first flicker of humans learning to fight back with strategy instead of just prayer. And that flicker was about to change who held power in Europe for the next several hundred years. Here's the part almost nobody expects. So many workers died that the ones who survived suddenly had leverage they never had before. Landowners who used to control every aspect of a peasant's life now desperately needed anyone willing to work their fields. Survivors started demanding better pay, better treatment, better lives. Some walked away from lords who had controlled their families for generations, because for the first time, there weren't enough workers left to stop them. A disease that was supposed to only destroy accidentally cracked open a system that had trapped ordinary people for centuries. Out of the worst horror in the continent's history, an early version of workers' rights was born. By the time it finally faded, the disease had killed an almost unthinkable share of the population. But the survivors weren't the same people who existed before it started. They had watched kings fail to protect them, watched the church struggle to explain it, watched their own neighbors turn feral or turn heroic depending on the day. And they walked away from that horror with something new, the belief that the world they'd been handed wasn't permanent, that it could be questioned, changed, rebuilt. Here's why this story still matters. Every time society is faced with something it doesn't understand, the same two forces show up. Fear that pushes people toward blame and panic, and quiet courage that pushes a small few towards solutions. Quarantine, workers' rights, questioning power that used to feel untouchable. All of it came out of the worst thing that happened to an entire continent. The people who survived weren't the strongest. They were the ones who adapted, while everyone else was busy looking for someone to blame. And here's the part I didn't tell you yet. This wasn't the only wave. The plague came back, again and again, for centuries. Each time, hitting a world that thought it had already seen the worst. If you want to know what happened when it returned, and why the second wave broke something in Europe that the first one never touched, that video is next. Don't scroll past it. Subscribe if history like this actually hits different when it's told like a story instead of a textbook. Because the next one might be worse than this.